Welcome, welcome. Come on in. Get comfy. I'm sure you are, hopefully, wherever you are. Justin Rivers, Chief Experience Officer. It's 11:59. Just letting everybody settle on in. A lot of you know the drill. So Elliot from Las Vegas, you're first today. Ding, ding, ding. Welcome. Robin, hello from the sunny Berkshires, also sort of sunny New York. I think it's going to be sunny later. It's been cloudy this morning. Mike from Brooklyn, hello. Jeffrey from the Upper West Side. Wow, you're going by really fast. Jessica from Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome. Joe from London. Richard from Hollywood. Richard, I'm glad you're here today. You're getting another shout out. Robo Morbo Morbeck. Robert, that's going to be tough to say. Hi, Pete. Got your email, Pete. Juan from Long Island City. Welcome, welcome. Martha, how are you? Good to see you. I think it's been a while. Hello, Gareth again. Gareth, you're on a roll. Gina from NYC. Joanna from San Francisco. Great. All right. I am going to start because for those of you who have come to a lot of my presentations and know me well, I always go over time. And I have the most amount of slides I ever have had for a presentation. So because I decided to do 15 of these secrets and a bonus secret, which we've done quite a bit, but we found that we have a lot of newbies on this talk. So we are going to be covering a lot of good stuff, but some stuff that are insiders and people who know my presentations well may know already, but I'm trying to do deeper dives into each of those as well. So I'm going to get started. Just a couple of PSA announcements. One of which is, again, if you are new to Livestorm and you're having trouble with audio or visual, just refresh your page. Livestorm tends to be a little sensitive with internet connection. Please feel free to chat with each other and me, although I'm going to put the chat aside during the presentation. I'll come back to it at the end. If you have questions for me, you'll see the question tab right next to the chat tab. Put them there and we will cover them later. Nicole is with me today, so hopefully Nicole will be able to help out at the end with Q&A if there are a lot of questions. And also, because there are 15 of these secrets and 170 slides, I'm going to go through a lot of these topics. Oh, good, Nicole. Smiley face means yes. We are going to move pretty quickly through the topics, but we can discuss more in questions for those who want to stick around after. All right. That's what I'm going to say. Welcome to everybody who's new. Again, my name is Justin Rivers. I'm Chief Experience Officer with Untapped New York, and my job is to create Untapped New York experiences, live tours and now virtual tours, both ones that I lead and host. Today, you've got me. And let's just get started. So these are culled from an article that Michelle put together. She did a digest of 160 of our favorite secrets of New York a couple, I want to say 4 or 5 months ago, maybe now, maybe 4 months ago. And so we decided, why don't we take some of these and make them into a presentation or a series of presentations? There's so many and so much good stuff to talk about. This is sort of an intro, so there's going to be a lot of stuff people know, but like I said, there's going to be some new spots, some new pictures, some never before seen things about some of the New York icons everybody knows and loves. All right. And this is obviously City Hall, which I will give a nod to at the end. City Hall station makes its way into so many of my presentations. It's one of my favorites. But let's start with secret number 1, and I've numbered them. It's almost like a game show. The Brooklyn Bridge had active wine vaults. Now, this is one of my favorites for a reason, just because I love the Brooklyn Bridge. It's a New York icon, and there are so many little secrets and stories about the bridge that you could go on forever, but this is one of the best. So it was in the Anchorage, actually the Manhattan side Anchorage, and just to give you a really, really brief rundown of what an Anchorage is, a suspension bridge, specifically like the Brooklyn Bridge, has 4 giant suspender cables which run from Brooklyn over the river to Manhattan. And so when they were building the bridge in the 1860s and 70s, they actually arduously created each of those suspension cables by taking 1-inch pieces of steel thread and roping them over the river twice, attaching them to what you see here, these eye bars, and then sending them back over the river again. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these wires became the large suspension cables that you see today when you are walking or driving over the bridge. Now, what would happen is these claw feet that had the pieces of steel string in them would be sunk, surrounded by concrete, and then they would build the masonry on top of them. And this is a picture of the Manhattan side anchorage, which you can see at the top towards the back. There is a train shed there. That's because trains ran over the Brooklyn Bridge until the 1950s. But you'll also see that the portals of this Manhattan anchorage had windows in them and doors and little bay windows, because the Roeblings, the father, son, and wife team who designed and finished the Brooklyn Bridge, wanted those spaces to have retail in them. But what happened was, because Brooklyn and New York, separate cities at the time, were the Brooklyn Bridge Company was a party to corruption because of William Boss Tweed. Both Brooklyn and New York took over the bridge before it opened, ran the operations of the bridge, and turned them into storage spaces. This is actually not what they look like today. This was a picture taken last year, but since this picture was taken, and I do not have an updated photo, they have busted the cinder block coverings in the windows and the doors. They are doing heavy maintenance work in the anchorage, and I believe they are preparing them for some kind of public activation. I'm hoping it has to do with the new bike lanes that are coming, but there's more structural work being done inside today. But if you were to go by the Warren, under the anchorage towards Warren Street, you would come to this tunnel. This photo was taken by one of our favorite photographers. Stealthy Dark Cyanide is his handle. And he has snuck into a lot of places the public should not go. And actually, he contacted us a couple days ago. We were afraid he was lost to time, but he's around. He's retired, and he lives out in Colorado. But you would walk down this passage into this space, which was public space for many years after the bridge was finished, because it was where the rich of New York would store their wine and champagne. The reason why is the conditions for storing wine usually is anywhere between 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And those conditions were created underground here in the anchorage. And you can see, if you look towards the top of that portal, you can see a champagne fresco that's been faded away. And the rich folks of New York at the time, we're thinking 1890s into the early 1900s, paid anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a year to rent space in this, what they called the Blue Grotto, because there was a statue of Mary in that little, I know my cursor doesn't show up on Livestorm, but if you look on the right side towards the bottom, there's a grotto-like enclave where they put a statue of Mary, who was put there to bless the booze. And this is the other way, or the way out, actually, of this wine storage area. And there were a couple of these areas in the anchorage that were used for wine storage for a while, a couple decades. The reason why New York did this was to help pay for the construction of the bridge. They also charged tolls for many years as well. Now, again, for those of you who have joined me for my multitude of subway talks, you also know that above these vaults were ramps for subway service onto the Brooklyn Bridge, which were scrapped in the 19-teens, right before they were going to open this service up. The Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company decided to scrap the Brooklyn Bridge service because they were afraid the bridge wasn't able to hold the weight of the trains. And you can, as you can see here, there were two different portals which connected eventually to the bridge itself. And there are some old subway tracks just hanging out, popping out of the ground. And again, this was somewhere between 1915 and 16. Now, on the other side, one day after a tour, Mandy Edgecombe had discovered that somebody in the DOT, the Department of Transportation, had mistakenly left the door open to the Brooklyn anchorage. And so Mandy and I got to go in. We did not break in. We just walked in. The door was open for a couple of days. And there are my feet shining a light on a time capsule that was sunk in 1983. Which celebrated the centennial of the bridge. And then here are my not great photos, because I'm also holding a flashlight, of passageways into the Brooklyn anchorage of the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, this was actually used as an event space up until 2006, I believe. So from the mid-1980s to 2006, there were music concerts in here, fashion shows, art installations, and the like. Another picture of the portal I had walked in. That way would have gotten you out. And there it is. So now let's move on to another very popular secret. And this, I'm dedicating some of these secrets today. This one is dedicated to Augustin Pasquet, who is our, I've got two for him, our chief executive officer. He loves this fact. And it's a fact many people love who come on our Grand Central tour. So for all of you who are new, hopefully you're learning something about this today. But Grand Central Terminal, obviously another iconic New York space, has a lot of spaces that the general public may have access to but not know about. So this is a 1939 cutaway map of Grand Central. I love this map, A, because it's really quite beautiful, but B, it shows you what a lot of the spaces we know today used to be in 1939, like Space G, which is that loft space on the right side. That used to be the art school, but we are interested where my arrow is pointing in Space H. Space H was a large cavernous area that was eventually taken over by CBS News. CBS News had studios 42 and 44 there, where Walter Cronkite would deliver the news, the evening news for CBS there, up until the mid-1960s. So these were, again, very large spaces. And here's another shot that they were calling an election, I believe, in the 1950s here. And then CBS News moves. The reason why CBS News moves is because camera technology was getting sensitive enough to sense the vibrations 5 stories below under the train tracks. So out they go. What replaces it for a while is this ski slope. Not all that great because it looks like they're skiing using wheels. Not exactly the best mode for fast skiing. No ice, no snow. It only lasts for about 2 years, and then it is replaced by what it is today, which is this tennis court known as the Vanderbilt Tennis Club. Now, if you're interested in positioning yourself, that window, which you see on the right side, is actually facing Park Avenue South, the 42nd Street entrance of Grand Central Terminal. And as you can see, it's one court. There's a half practice court and a gym also on the other side of that green wall. And that, Robin, that's your photo. I know you're here today. I love that photo because it's sort of the juxtaposition of a tennis court and those iconic Grand Central windows. And it just isn't something you associate with Grand Central Terminal if you don't know it's there. Now, while we're there, let's talk a little bit about track 61, the secret track to the Waldorf Astoria. We've been talking a lot about this track lately because we did a program with the Waldorf Astoria. And I wanted to do a little bit more myth busting on it because we talk about what the track was used for, and we don't always have the story right. So let's do a little bit of myth busting. First of all, I found these, I can't remember where now, but these were the original plans of Grand Central Depot from 1871, and then a track expansion in 1880s, I think it's 6. So the original track footprint of the first Grand Central Depot was only 12 tracks. Then when they upgraded to Grand Central Station, in the late 1880s, they add on 8 additional tracks for 20 tracks because one of the problems with Grand Central when it opened was it didn't have the capacity for the amount of people who were using it, much like an issue that's affecting Penn right now. But later on, after a tragic accident in 1902, they decide to tear down the station and replace it with a terminal. And the terminal track footprint actually consists of 64 tracks. So you go from 20 to 64 on 2 levels, but there are spiral tracks that don't lead. They go sort of, or they're not spiral in shape, but they sort of spiral off of the Grand Central Terminal tracks to, as you can see here, this space on 50th and Park and Lexington and Lexington. Now, that was not for the Waldorf Astoria. The Waldorf Astoria is there today, and they've utilized these tracks. But what was originally there was a power plant for the New York Central. Now, I love this shot. This is a shot from 1914 of Terminal City before it was Terminal City. William Wilgus, who was the main engineer for the New York Central, had this ingenious idea to deck over all of this new track. That, because remember, if you look at that map, I'm going to go back for a second, that's all usable land if they deck it over. And of course they did. There it is. And this is before the buildings start getting put onto Park Avenue. This is Park Avenue, ladies and gentlemen. And if you see where that arrow is pointing, that was the old power plant for the New York Central, which in the mid-1920s gets taken down. They replace the power source with one underground closer to Grand Central Terminal. And what gets built there but the Waldorf Astoria. Now, you can see here in this photo that the tracks that were the arrow was pointing to on the map, those tracks that sort of went off of the Grand Central tracks, those are tracks that were built to service the power plant, mainly to bring coal and goods in and out of that power facility. But when the power facility is taken down and they replace it with the Waldorf Astoria, those tracks remain active. And the Waldorf Astoria decides they would be able to provide the very, very rich of America with private train access directly to their suites. So what they do is they build an elevator from track level. If anybody's coming in on private rail, which was apparently definitely a thing, the Fricks did it, and we'll talk about the Fricks soon. They could get on an elevator from track level. The public did not need to see them and go directly to their suites. Now, the myth that has gone on for many, many years, and one that I also told about also, was that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because he suffered with polio, tried his best to hide from the public the fact that he had trouble walking or needed assistance in walking. And he also had a very famous Pierce Arrow limousine, which went all around with him, that would bring him to public events where, like this, he could wave to the public without having to walk. So there was story upon story being told about FDR's private train, which would bring him to the Waldorf Astoria and get this car on an elevator and bring the elevator, it was a freight elevator, up to the parking garage and out of the Waldorf Astoria. A couple problems with the story, one of which is the elevator doesn't seem big enough to fit the car. It's only 6 feet wide. Well, there's a picture of the last known usage of a head of state or somebody, a politician, using the track and the elevator, and that's Adlai Stevenson in 1952. FDR was reported to use it, but he was reported to use it to get him up to a room in the Waldorf Astoria, not to get the car out to the street. Actually, the first person to use the elevator was John J. Pershing. Pershing, Black Jack Pershing, who was a famous World War I general, used it in 1938 on a visit to the city where he spoke at the Waldorf itself. Now, let me, there's a picture of, a modern day picture of Track 61 leading toward the Waldorf Astoria. And there is a picture of a train that has made its way into much myth and lore. Now, that train had been under there for decades. And Dan Brucker, who was leading public relations tours for the MTA on behalf of Grand Central Terminal, if you were lucky and you got a Dan Brucker tour, they were a lot of fun. You got to go down to M42 basement. Sometimes you'd get to go out to this car under the Waldorf. And he would tell you that this was the limousine car, and that the car, this is where FDR's car was being held before it got into the elevator. Well, Michelle Young, our founder and head writer and editor, did a lot of research into finding out that this was actually probably not even part of FDR's train retinue, but it was a baggage car. And just because of its location on Track 61 under the Waldorf sort of gathered all of this myth and lore about it. But now if you go up to street level in the Waldorf Astoria, you'll see this gold door. This gold door 101 to 121 will say Metro North Fire Exit on it. And those two doors, the larger doors, are part of the elevator mechanism that would take you from downstairs from the track all the way up. Now, what is up to debate is if the portal to the right, which is sealed now with a vent, actually was able to carry cars. We do not know. But the elevator is still active. And as a matter of fact, we did a presentation with the Waldorf Astoria team, the sales team at the towers of Waldorf Astoria, and they confirmed that the elevator is still very much in existence and will be used. It's part of the landmarking of the building itself. So I really had a lot of fun with this. We could do a whole talk on this, but I am going to move on. The train about 6 or 7 years ago now, I think it's probably 6 years ago, was removed from track 61 and was brought up to the Danbury Railway Museum up in Connecticut, where this photo is of Michelle. She went up to visit it. And I had a tour that day, so I couldn't go. And this is the inside of that car at Danbury. Really quite cool. Another secret number 4, a fake Brooklyn Heights townhouse hides a subway ventilation system. This is a great story because it just hits all of my favorite things about New York. The subway, I love Brooklyn Heights. It's one of my favorite neighborhoods. And of course, I love townhouses. Dream to live in one someday. But if you go to Girolamo Street, which is one of the very, I like to call them storybook quiet streets of Brooklyn Heights, right near the water. Now you get a view of Brooklyn Bridge Park. There is this house, which was built in 1847, and it's 58 Girolamo Street. And if you walk right by it, you probably would never even think twice about those dark plexiglass windows that are hiding the fact that there's nothing behind that facade but a giant vent used by the Interborough Rapid Transit, or today the MTA. So this house was built as a Greek revival in 1847 and was used as a private residence until 1908. In 1908, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, New York's first subway company, was building a tunnel to Brooklyn from Lower Manhattan and needed ventilation down into the system. And so they purchased this house and they convert it into a subway vent. Now, because of landmarking, because the neighborhood is landmarked, they had to keep the facade and maintain the facade and use a certain type of window to keep the windows the way they were as well. Now, if you look really closely at it, and actually I took this picture 2 days ago. I just took a walk over there and decided it was a really beautiful day, and decided to get this sort of up close shot of the windows. And as you can see, they look, it's almost kind of scary looking. It almost looks like there's, you know, like a ghost house in there or something. And here's a map of this is New York's first subway map. For those of you who've joined me on my subway tour in person, you get a copy of this map. That red line is the first subway line from 1904. And then you can see there's a dotted line under the East River, which leads out to Brooklyn. And if you look really closely where the arrow is, there's a little square right off of that line. That square denotes the vent house. So that is actually the vent house that I just showed you at 58 Girolamo. And here was an article from the Times in, I believe it was 1907, announcing fresh air for tunnel plant site purchased, ventilator for Brooklyn Tube to be in Girolamo Street. Now, one of the things that was very interesting is the advent of bringing train service to Brooklyn Heights will, as many of the residents feared at the time, sort of cheapen the neighborhood. And what happened was, because it was easier to get to Brooklyn Heights, you didn't have to take the ferry or the bridge anymore. You could just take the train. A lot of people were moving out. They were selling the townhouses and chopping them up into smaller apartments. But of course, Brooklyn Heights today maintains so much of its charm because it is landmarked as a neighborhood. Now, right out in front of the house, if you get closer, you'll see where there should be an entrance to the basement. There's sort of like a metallic hood and this standpipe, which is NYC Transit. And if you look through the front door, this is a crack. Through the front door, you'll get this scene. So this is what's going on. There's no elegant foyer. It's just doors to the ventilation system. Now, while we're in the neighborhood, and again, this is secret number 5, is something a lot of my attendees know very well, who've seen before. I'm going to add a new spin to this one today. The world's oldest subway tunnel is in Brooklyn, and you can have a drink in it. So 1844, the first subterranean train tunnel is built. at a very small stretch under Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn Heights. Actually, it's the border between Cobble Hill and Brooklyn Heights, and it was built for the Brooklyn Jamaica Train Company, and that was the precursor to the LIRR. And as you can see where that red line is, that is the extent of the underground train tunnel. And you'd take a ferry from Whitehall Street, as you could see by that line. You would get on a train at the foot of Atlantic, and that train would take you under the tunnel for about 1,000 or so feet, and then out to an elevated track on the Brooklyn Jamaica, which would take you all the way out to the North Fork of Long Island. 1980, Bob Diamond, who was an engineering student, heard about this tunnel on the Cosgrove Report and decided he was going to go find it. I usually get into this story a little bit more detail when we do subway talks, but I'm going to keep us moving. He does find it, by the way. That's him discovering it. And then he started leading tours for many years, up until 2009, bringing people down into the world's first subterranean train tunnel. And this is a picture from Diana. I don't know if Diana's here today, one of our insiders, because when I went on the tour, I didn't take any pictures because I'm a dummy, but I did go on the tour. And how you'd get into the tunnel was when the light changed between Court and Atlantic, they'd ferry you out to the middle of the street. You'd go down the manhole cover. You'd end up here in between the street and the services. You'd walk through this door, and then there was a broken wall that you would walk into and climb down a set of wooden stairs built by Diamond to bring you into the tunnel. And this is what you would walk into, although not lit like this. This was a publicity photo where they lit the tunnel so you could see it. And here's another view of it. This is actually what it really looked like to be down there with a group. It was very dark and only powered by your only flashlight, which you were told to bring. And boy, you hope your flashlight had good batteries in it, because if it died, you were screwed. I was so nervous. I was down there the whole time thinking, oh God, if my batteries die, it's going to be really dark down here. And Bob Diamond would lead you around. There he is, 4 or 5 stops throughout the tunnel, talking to you about what the tunnel did, a couple of features about the tunnel, including a brick wall all the way at the western end that he thought 1840s locomotive was sealed up in. National Geographic Television was supposed to go down there and document him exhuming this, but the FDNY said, absolutely not, we're shutting you down in 2009. Now, there is a way to sort of experience the tunnel today. Legally, you can go to Chamois. Now, where the arrow is pointing, it's on Atlantic Avenue. I am now blanking on the exact address, but it's between Henry and Clinton. And I walked by there the other day as well, just to make sure I'm not giving you bad information. They are open. They have so far survived the pandemic. And if you see, there's a staircase that leads downstairs under the main restaurant. And that is a bar that is part of Chamois, but it has a separate name called La Boudoir. And La Boudoir is French themed. It's supposed to be sort of, the idea is it's Marie Antoinette's bedroom that you are going into. And you can get really great drinks. I've been there a couple times. There's a bust of Marie Antoinette down there. They make a really great Manhattan, which I believe is what I had when I was there. But the real attraction is you can sit in the old coal room of the Atlantic Avenue tunnel. This was a side chamber that was built alongside the tunnel, and it stored coal for the trains that were coming in at the foot of Atlantic. And there's a big banquette in there. You can rent it for private space. I was looking into doing it for my 40th, but decided to do something else. Slightly regretting it. But that's how you can go and have a drink in the world's oldest train tunnel in Brooklyn. Now, if La Boudoir is open yet, I'm not sure. New York is up to 50% indoor capacity. I know the restaurant is upstairs. I'm not sure if they've opened the bar yet. Bars are different situations. They're harder to sort of maintain social distancing. And so it's probably going to open soon, hopefully. While we're in Brooklyn, secret number 6. Cheese is being, this is also dedicated to Augustin. This is one of his favorite things about New York, period, end of story, and I know why. Augustin hails from France himself. Cheese is being aged in beer tunnels from the 1850s. It is a really neat story. So this building here, which is on Bergen, right off of Franklin Avenue in Brooklyn, was built in the 1850s as a brewery. And Brooklyn was a very popular borough for brewing beer. And as you can see, if you look all the way at the top, there is a faded Heinz sign, because this was also a Heinz packaging facility as well in the early to mid 20th century. But at this point, it was purchased by a private resident who decided he was going to turn the building, the upper levels, into apartments, and then use the lower levels for cheese caves. And there it's called the Crown Finish Caves, where the arrow is. And our office, by the way, when we used to have an office, we do not anymore, was on Dean Street, right behind the caves. So where you see Bergen next door, that suite 323, that's where our offices was. We were at 1000 Dean. Offices were, sorry, 1000 Dean until the pandemic hit. But this is what Crown Finish looks like downstairs. Now, here's what happens. Crown Finish Caves is a privately owned company which takes cheese from all over the world. There's cheese from the Hudson Valley. There's cheese from Vermont, Wisconsin. There's cheese from Italy and France. And what they do is they take something called green cheese. And green cheese is young cheese. It's not yet aged to be sort of what we would consider tasty, edible cheese. And they put it through the process of affinage. And I hope I'm saying that right. But that is, affinage is a finishing process for cheese. And it usually, as I'm going to quote the New York Times here, quote, "It's a series of tedious ritualized procedures, washing, flipping, brushing, patting, spritzing, that are meant to inch each wheel and wedge towards an apex of delectability." That actually came from a New York Times article about the Crown Finish Caves. And these caves were very extensive. The brewing company, whose name I do not have, unfortunately, closed in 1916 and left caves that stretched all the way from Bergen to Dean Street. And Crown Finish had realized that they could actually finish about 100,000 pounds of cheese at one time, but they've only had the finances to retrofit one tunnel. So right now they have the capacity to age 25,000 pounds of cheese. And how they do that is they actually have brought in an environmental system which was developed by the Kluger Company, which is a French-owned cheese. They create cheese finishing spaces with an environmental system that keeps the room at about 52 to 53 degrees and humidity at about 92%. So that is the optimal range for finishing cheese. But what they've also done is, and here is a picture of the caves before they had got to them, they've also created in one of the caves an event space. So pre-pandemic, a couple times a month, they were doing music venues, they were doing sort of open mic nights and theatrical shows. So you could have gone down there, you could have seen a musical act. This is a picture from their website of one of their musical acts, hung out in the cheese caves, and then got to try some cheese. Now, the cheese caves are not open normally for public consumption to come down and try cheese. This is, again, companies are paying them to age their cheese in these tunnels, but you can subscribe to the Crown Finish Caves and get sort of like a cheese CSA delivered to you, which I think is pretty cool. And actually, Augustin had one. He said he cut back on the subscription during the pandemic to save money. And it was one of the worst things that had happened to him during the pandemic. But you can actually do a cheese CSA from Crown Finish if you would like. And here's a nice close-up picture. As you can see, these are also Augustin's pictures. He got to go down and he got a tour from the owner. I think what is also super interesting is that they also age butter. And this is not a picture of the aged butter, I believe. This is it. So this is a picture of the butter that's aging. And Mamafuko, David Chang, the chef, his very famous restaurant, Mamafuko, pays Crown Finish to age their cheese. And they do about 20 pounds a week of it for the restaurant. Again, this is all pre-pandemic, which comes out with their bread course. And just another gratuitous shot of cheese aging in these old beer tunnels. All right, secret number 7. going at a pretty good clip here. A river flows under the Empire State Building. Now, a lot of you who know New York history and know about sort of the natural wonders of the island of Manhattan, what we know as Manhattan, you know there were a lot of different types of bodies of water flowing and still flowing under us today. And the Empire State Building is no exception. And also, a lot of you may know that on the site of the Empire State Building, before they built the Empire State Building, was the Waldorf and Astoria Hotel, which were joined together. And then in 1929, it was decided that they were going to sell the Waldorf Astoria for $1 and then move it to where we were just talking about on Park Avenue, behind Grand Central Terminal, and a 102-story Art Deco skyscraper in Manhattan would be erected. And not only would it be erected, it would be erected quickly in sort of a record 19 months. So they begin the whole process of demolishing the hotel and building the skyscraper in 1929, late 1929. They're finished by May of 1931. Now, you could do multiple talks on the Empire State Building, many reasons, the building of it, how it's used afterwards, the really great documentation that was done of the construction, which actually there's a really great exhibit that they do at the Empire State Building after they redid it, of all of the great pictures that were taken of the construction of it. But what most people don't know is that the Empire State Building beneath it has a tributary from a former pond under it. And that's just a really great picture of the Empire State Building. And the way you can trace this pond is through this iconic map. It's Colonel Egbert Weil's water map of 1874. Now, don't worry, I will provide a link to the map for all my map lovers on this talk. It will be much bigger. This to do the full map, I needed to shrink it down so that it didn't pixelate. But we are going to zero in on the mid section of Manhattan. Right there, you'll see a giant, well, not giant, but a pond. And that was called Sunfish Pond, extended to 4th Avenue. And they're a little bit closer. Now, Empire State Building is not built exactly on this pond. It's built a little further west on one of the tributaries which feeds the pond. And that tributary still exists today. And this is actually a photo of the basement of the Empire State Building when CBS News went down and did a Secrets of the Empire State Building. We kind of think they kind of thought that was cool because of us. And what you're seeing here is you see some water residue on the floor there, some leftover puddles. After a big snow melt or a very large storm, this room could fill up with up to 6 feet of water. And you can actually see the watermark right next to the reporter on the wall. That comes because of the tributary that's still running under the Empire State Building. And he is being led around by one of the heads of the Empire State Building, Dana Schneider. She's a senior vice president and director of energy and sustainability, because one of the things about the new and improved Empire State Building is it's one of the most energy efficient green buildings in Manhattan today. But the story doesn't end there. Michelle and I were lucky enough in November to get a VIP behind the scenes tour of the Empire State Building. And although they didn't take us down to this basement, they took us down one level above it to a space that they do not take the general public to, which is an old bank vault that they say has now so big, it has become part of the structure of the lower building. And I have a video that I took of that tour, and I'm going to show it to you. So give me 1 second as I call it up.
A little bit of a construction zone, but
we're used to that. Don't worry.
How cool is that? So come on in. You can walk all the way in. You don't get too far. Yeah. But it's cool to walk inside and look up because you'll notice the steel ceilings. Yeah. This was filled with safe deposit boxes that were taken out sometime in the late 90s. This is so heavy and really essentially part of the building now. That's one of the reasons why it's still here and kind of locked out, because otherwise I'm sure, you know, back in the 60s they would have just taken it out like they did with a lot of things. But just even be able to look at the door and like see the mechanics in it,
cool.
it's really, really cool.
You can go.
Like this part.
This is, yeah, this is where it's fun.
Yeah.
So,
When I do the all access, I love to print them.
yeah.
That is
It's a great photo too. Yeah, he doesn't want to stand it evolved. Maybe Justin will.
As you can tell, I'm the best cameraman ever. And that was me making exclamations behind the camera because that was my phone. But that was really cool. I had no idea that there was that vault and that it had become such a part of the lower structure of the Empire State Building. And those two guides, by the way, who led us around, we had a guide for each of us, Michelle and I, and they were phenomenal. They were really good. The Empire State Building was a super class act for that tour. So shout out to them. All right, so secret number 8, the world's largest architectural model is in Queens, and I'm dedicating this secret to Richard and Robin Roth, Richard Roth Jr., who I know is on this talk. I believe he's on this talk. I saw him before, and Robin, who I know is here because she said hi. A lot of these pictures are Robin's. I visit the Panorama a couple times a month on our World's Fair tour. I was there on Sunday, but this was this largest architectural model is part of a World's Fair remnant tour that I give. And it is in what was the New York City building, built in 1939 for the 1939 World's Fair. And here you can see it in construction. These photos are from Robert Moses's professional parks collection, which I am very, very lucky to know the head archivist of. So I get lots of goodies from her. And here is a picture from the Grand Central Parkway of the completed what we know today is the Queens Museum, but the New York City Pavilion, which would become the New York City Pavilion in 1964 for the World's Fair. And part of this building was devoted to the panorama of New York City. But the other half of the building was an ice skating rink. And as a lot of matter of fact, most people who come on my tour remember it mostly as an ice skating rink or, you know, sort of an arena place to ice skate, as you can see here, before it becomes the Queens Museum. And this is, I believe this shot is from the late 70s or early 80s, when the panorama of New York, which was originally a helicopter ride for the 1964-65 World's Fair, becomes part of the Queens Museum. It's left as a permanent gift to the people of New York from Robert Moses. And here it is. And I always say, you know, I have people say, what are, you know, top 3 to 5 things? I'm in New York for 48 hours. I haven't been to New York. I've only been to New York once. I say, it's worth it. Get in a cab or get on the 7 train. I tell them to take the 7, but some people are, you know, whatever. And go to the Queens Museum and see the panorama. It will take your breath away. Pictures don't do it justice, but we'll try. Here is a picture of Lower Manhattan. And as you can see, certain buildings have been updated over time, but the Twin Towers are left there on the model on purpose. And of course, the panorama. So the past couple of months, you know, the panorama is usually very quiet when I take tours in there. It's us and a couple of other people. And I noticed the past couple of times the panorama has been jammed. And I walk in and I actually talked to, I've become friends with one of the docents over there. And I said, you know, what is it, the pandemic or people bored? And people said, no, it was Fran Lebowitz. When she did Pretend It's a City with Marty Scorsese, she has a part of the documentary series where she's walking on the panorama. And I went, oh yeah, right, duh. Because we're going to talk about another part that she talks about a little later on. And it's made it famous. But of course, she is not the first person to have walked on the panorama model. One of our attendees today, Richard Roth Jr., has, because in 1990, Emery Roth and Sons were asked to help update the panorama. The panorama originally had, I think, 835,000 buildings on it. And then it was taken to 175 over time. And there is a picture with Richard and his father and his son in front of all of the Emery Roth and Sons buildings that they were putting on the panorama. And there is a picture of Richard and his son putting those buildings on the panorama. So Fran, you can eat your heart out, although I do love Fran. But if you look at Lower Manhattan, a lot of Lower Manhattan is dotted with Roth buildings. And this is how I met Robin, who has become a dear friend. And of course, one of our star insiders. Was our first meeting was on a World's Fair tour. She came on. And this is a Robin photo. As I believe this one is too, Robin, but I'm not sure. I've interspersed some of my own in here too, so I kind of forget. Whichever ones are better are Robin's. And there is a photo from the back catwalk. They replaced the helicopter track with a catwalk for people to walk over all 5 of the boroughs. Some of them have glass so you can look down. And of course, I tell everybody, no matter how long it takes, stay for a night mode because it has a day and a night mode and the parks glow green. That was Robert Moses telling you how many parks he gave you. But the night mode is really cool. Also, watch out for the plane that takes off and lands from LaGuardia. And it was really great. I had brought, it was a private tour this weekend of a family from Long Island whose father was an electrician he did electrical work at the World's Fair in the 60s, and 2 brothers and their families wanted to come out and see the fairgrounds where their father worked, and they never had gone to the panorama before. And I was like, are you kidding me? And their minds were absolutely blown. So secret number 9, there is a bowling alley in the Frick. Frick is one of my favorite spots in New York because before it is now closed for renovations, the house itself, but it is a really great collection of art in a really awesome setting. But what most people don't know is downstairs in the basement was Henry Clay Frick's personal bowling alley. So a lot of you may know on, I believe it's 70th and 5th, 70th, yeah, is the Frick, which was the old Gilded Age mansion of Henry Clay Frick, excuse me. I need a drink of water. Give me 2 seconds. There we go. Henry Clay Frick, who was a Pennsylvania boy who becomes one of the richest men in America through the use of, by selling steel, mining steel, big steel guy. And gets into bed with Carnegie, not literally, and of course becomes one of the richest men in America. And at that time, when you are gathering all this wealth in the late 19th and early 20th century, you are trying to emulate European counterparts who are bringing culture and sort of elegance into the world. And that's what a lot of these steel barons were trying to do, including Frick. So he builds the 61-room house and fills it with Rococo and Renaissance furniture, and of course, some of the most impressive painters of all time. And if you haven't been, when it reopens, you should go. And actually, this is a picture of Frick before he becomes rich. Very simple Pennsylvania guy. Now, downstairs, which was converted by his daughter into an office, originally Frick had made a bowling alley because it was a sign of status back then. It was played. Bowling was a game of the very rich at that point. And one of your signs of status is if you had a bowling alley at your estate. So he put a 2-lane bowling alley downstairs. His daughter did not love bowling, so she turns it into an office for what becomes a foundation for art before the Frick actually is formed in 1935, I believe, is when the collection becomes a museum. And Michelle got to go down. A PR rep from the Frick brought Michelle Young down, and they reconverted and restored the space. It is a functioning bowling alley today. And Michelle actually got to bowl down there. And this is her photo. Now, again, the Frick story and the Frick collection story could be a whole other talk within himself. He was a very derisive character. He did a lot of good. He also did a lot of bad. He's indirectly blamed for the Johnstown flood. A lot of really crazy stuff in his life. There was an assassination attempt on his life, but he does survive it. He also was supposed to be on the Titanic, but he survives that, only to have a heart attack a couple of years later. But I am going to show you, before I show you anything more, I'm going to show you a very short clip of Michelle bowling down in the Frick bowling alley. This is not open to the public, by the way, nor is there any plan anytime soon to open it to the public, mainly because of fire code regulations, which you need to have entryway in and out two ways to get in and out of the room. There's only one way, and it's down a very long hallway downstairs where the workers of the Frick go. But let me share this video Michelle sent me to share with you.
Not too bad.
Let's do that again.
Want me to do it again?
Yeah.
So not a long video, but as you could see, she got to do it. Now, one of the ingenious things about this bowling alley was you did not have the ability to electronically or automatically reset the pins. You had to go back and put the pins there. Human labor had to do it. As you could see here, this is from that right after Michelle threw that ball. But it did have a gravity return. So the ball would sort of roll over and it would use gravity to sort of take it back to the player, which was interesting. And these pictures have never been seen by the public. This was the billiards room off to the side, which Michelle got to go into. Really, really lucky trip for Michelle that day. Now, of course, upstairs, one of the reasons why the Frick is so loved is because it is, again, somebody's home, even as lavish as it is, where you can see some of the finest paintings ever done in the world. And one of the favorites is Giovanni Bellini's St. Francis in Ecstasy, which is what they are looking at in this photo, which actually it was reported Frick hated for many years until he actually grew to like it. They'd say he would sit and contemplate it at night and finally learned to love it, but hated it at first. And one of the directors at the Frick said they think it was one of the most popular paintings to see because of the frequency which they had to replace the carpet under it, which is an interesting way to tell. And of course, that pediment right over the door to the Frick is one of the first great supermodels in the world, Audrey Marie Munson, who finds her image on many, many New York monuments. She was also the first woman to appear nude in film. Secret number 10, the smallest piece of land in New York City, which actually is now assumed into a larger piece of property, but why not? So it's the Hess Triangle. For those of you who know the village very well, Greenwich Village, or live in the village, you may know that there was an extension of 6th Avenue which plowed its way down from Penn Station. I'm sorry, 7th Avenue. When Penn Station was built in 1910, the IRT, Interborough Rapid Transit, decided that they needed to run subway service, which they did not have, up the west side of Manhattan to connect with Penn Station. So by 1916, they wanted subway service to connect to Penn. To do that, they needed to plow down quite a bit of Greenwich Village to create what they call the 7th Avenue extension. Now, this map has an overlay of pre-extension on top of a modern map of Greenwich Village. So you can see just how 7th Avenue plows right through the center of this map. And if you can make it out by the triangle that says park right across the street, you'll see the words Voorhees. And that's what we'd be talking about. This is what it looks like post extension. And there's a little tiny, barely visible up by the 54 right above it. There is a little tiny speck of land, which we know today as the Hess Triangle, which is literally 25 by 27 inches. It's smaller than a yield sign on the street. And I forgot, it's like 0.007937, some ridiculous decimal of an acre. Now, when they had come through with this extension, hundreds of buildings were going to be taken out. And this was an article in the Times talking about some of the buildings that would be demolished for the 7th Avenue extension. And of course, the idea was split down the middle, whether this was a good thing or not. But to business owners and people who own these buildings, it was an awful thing because although they could get paid for it, if they didn't want to go, it could be an eminent domain situation. And just to show you, this was actually a photo of the 6th Avenue extension, which happened a little later after the 7th Avenue extension, how they just had to clear on these diagonals these pieces of Greenwich Village out. And what happened was the Voorhees, which was a 6-story triangular shaped building, was chopped, basically cut right off the map. Now, it was owned by a Philadelphia investor named David Hess. He didn't live there, but he owned the building. He lived in Philadelphia. And David Hess had his property taken. It was destroyed, but the city left that very small piece of land, mainly by accident. And what happened was David Hess dies. And in the late 1920s, his son Frank gets a tax bill from the city for the piece of land. Basically, they were charging him $100 a year for this little triangular piece of land right there. And Frank Hess says, I don't own this land. The city took the land from my father against his wishes. And so the city basically asked him to redonate the land back to the city. And he said, no, you know what? Absolutely not. What he did is he paid the taxes and then sold the piece of land to the cigar shop owner. That cigar shop has been there since the 1930s. And the original owner of the cigar shop was a man by the name of Brian Hughes, who had a predilection for jokes. He loved to be a big jokester. One of his most famous jokes was he said that he was the president of the Dollar Savings Bank in the Bronx and the owner of a company that made paper boxes. Of course, none of that was true. And he had invited the city to a big grand opening of a park that he was going to put outside of his shop, his cigar shop. And what he said that this shop called for were trees, flower beds, and shrubs. And he was going to set up a bandstand to open this park up. The Hartford Courant, a Hartford, Connecticut paper, actually showed up. And this is what they wrote. I love this. No attempt has been made so far as I can discover to carry out Mr. Hughes' injunctions that it be set out with trees, shrubs, flower beds, a bandstand, and benches. In Manhattan, it would hardly serve as a breathing space for a Subway sardine. Talk about a great joke. And there it is. And these tiles were put down in the late I believe it was 1928 or 29. And it says property of the Hess estate, which has never been dedicated for public purpose. So screw you, New York City. Although now technically it is private property. Number 11. Oh, we are at a good clip here. We're doing pretty well. There is a room frozen in 1893 at the Players Club. This is also a really great story. We were offering, and I believe we will go back to offering tours with the Players Club once they open their operations back up post-pandemic. But the Players Club is 16 Gramercy Park South, and it's a private members-only club. It was founded in 1888 by the very famous, at the time, Shakespearean actor Edwin Booth. Now, of course, you may know the Booth name from his brother, who unfortunately assassinated President Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth. The Booths were actors. Their father was an actor. They all sounded like they might have been slightly kooky people, including Dad. But Edwin wanted to put together the Players Club as for two purposes. One, to fix the tarnish of the Booth name from his brother's act of killing the president, but also he wanted to create a club where up-and-coming theatrical artists could rub noses and get funding for their projects with the rich. And this is a photo of one of the rooms as you come up the stairs of the Players Club. Actually, I know an actor who was actually in one of my shows who is a docent here, Rory Schwartz. And upstairs was Edwin Booth's bedroom. And Edwin Booth died in this room in 1893. And you can even, if you go up into the room, there's a distinct kind of smell that is still very 1893. You can smell the tobacco on the drapes because nothing has been touched here since 1893. It's practically exactly the way it was the day he died. Now, a couple of creepy things about the room, besides the fact that it's frozen in time from the day that Edwin Booth died. There's also a skull, which was used in a production of Hamlet by Junius Brutus Booth, who was the father of John Wilkes and Edwin. And that skull was actually taken by or made from the head of somebody that Junius Booth actually did jail time with. He was a horse thief. And his name was, I believe his name was Fontaine. I don't know what his last name was. But when he was hung for his crimes, Fontaine. And when he made an express wish that his head be given to Junius Brutus Booth, who would then use it when he played Hamlet. And boy, did he ever. And it made its way into the Players Club. And there it is. And the inscription on the skull says, "And the rest is silence." There's also, as you can see, a dagger that Edwin Booth used to play Hamlet, that he used in Hamlet as well. Really quite interesting. Now, the Players Club is really a neat place, and it has had many famous members, even in modern times. Jimmy Fallon is a member. Ethan Hawke is a member. Carol Burnett is a member. I'd like to be a member someday, but we'll see how that goes. And there's a pool cue that was used by Mark Twain. Mark Twain was also a member. Really interesting space. And if you haven't, and if you get the chance, once we start doing tours with them again, it's really a great experience. And I'm sure some of you on this talk may have been there. And also some of the, I always forget about this one, they have some of the last original gas lights in this area of Manhattan in use. And they're quite impressive at night. I've done a couple of talks at the National Art Club, which is right next door. Also a beautiful building off of Gramercy Park. But their lanterns don't, their gas lights don't work, unfortunately. Secret number 12, Bowling Green's fence is a standing record to the American Revolution and one of the oldest standing structures in Lower Manhattan. For some of my favorite returnees or groupies, as Robin calls them, you'll know this story very well. But for those of you who don't know this story, it's one of my favorite things to reveal because it's something you can go right out and touch. Bowling Green was New York's first municipal park, founded in 1733 when we were a British colony, but has its roots back in Dutch New Amsterdam when it was used as a place not only for cattle trading, but also to bowl. When Dutchmen were done with their day, they'd go get a cold one at a tavern right off of this park, and they would set up bowling pins. And here we are, there's the Costello Plan map, and you could see that patch of green at the base of Broadway. That will become New York's very first municipal park, Bowling Green. And this is actually not Bowling Green, this is City Hall Park today, which was known as New York Common. And this is a photo of George Washington and the militia the evening of July 9th, 1776, when a copy of the Declaration of Independence was sent up to the New York colony to be read. And what happened was, now, before all of this, the Townshend Acts were enacted, and there was a lot of scuffling in the colonies about this Townshend Act from King George III. And the New Yorkers played it pretty cool, and King George III wanted to reward his colony. And what he did was he sent an equestrian statue of himself to be placed in the center of Bowling Green Park. And New Yorkers hated it so much that they vandalized it at night. So in 1766, they erected the fence around the park that is there today. Now, fast forward to 1776. And what happens is New Yorkers are charged with patriotism. They go down Broadway from New York Common. They go down with crowbars and ropes, and they take down this equestrian statue of King George III. They decapitate him, they chop up his body and his head, they melt down most of the statue to be used as 48,000 musket bullets against the redcoats when they show up. And there, as you can see in this painting, the fence is still there. And what you don't see in this painting is that on the top of the posts were crown finials that were King George III. So all of those crowns were also sawed off during this act of vandalism or patriotism, depending on who you are. And those were also melted down. Now, that fence has not changed since 1766. And those, you can see, each one of those posts has uneven cuts on them. Those uneven cuts are a basic record of that evening of July 9th, 1776, a place that you could go, you could touch history, you could run your fingers right over those uneven cuts that those patriots made. And of course, on every one of my Dutch New Amsterdam tours, I always encourage people to do so. And there is a picture of people doing so. And what's really cool is we walk right past the fence. Nobody bothers to read the plaque. I tell the story and everyone's like, what? And then we come out and everybody wants to touch the fence. Super cool. Secret 13, almost done. There is a century-old clock built into a Broadway sidewalk. Now, this was another secret that was made popular again by Pretend It's a City with Fran, because Fran took a picture by this. But we at Untapped New York actually are involved in that story. So we'll talk about that in 2 minutes. But William Barthman was a German immigrant who came over as a jeweler and a clockmaker and put his first jewelry store in 1884 on the corner of Broadway and Maiden Lane in a sort of a very humble brick building. But his jewelry store is such a hit that he is able to replace it with a much nicer building, which was designed by C.P.H. Gilbert, who was a well-known architect who did Convent of the Sacred Heart and a couple of other really beautiful spaces in New York, and builds a very beautiful building. After he completes that building, Barthman decides in the 1890s, I think it was 1896, he wants to put a clock outside of the store in the sidewalk to attract people into the store. His first clock was very simple, but in 1899, he brings on another employee by the name of Frank Holm, who was also a German immigrant, who designs a very, very futuristic clock, which is the one that you see depicted here in this drawing. It wasn't a clock with a face and hands. It was almost like those old school alarm clocks that had the sort of tiles that would peel back. And people thought this was great. This was like, again, this is 1899. This is very futuristic for the time. The problem was it was very, very complicated to run and maintain. Only Holm knew how to do it. And when Holm died in 1917, the clock broke shortly after. And in 1925, they needed to replace the clock. So they replaced it with this clock, which you could see, which is in front of the door. The clock ends up moving to around the corner. And the clock mechanism, although it's been moved, is the same mechanism that had been used since its installation in 1925. You could see here it was moved to the corner. This is from the 1940s. And the sidewalk, again, changes, but the clock itself, the mechanism stays the same with the face. And it has been changed multiple times. Now, this picture right here was taken, I believe, by Michelle. And last spring, we get an email from a film production company. I don't remember the name, but it wasn't obvious. And they said, can we license this photo from you? And Michelle said, sure. And they paid for the photo, but they didn't say why they were using the photo. All right. Now, what happened was a couple of years ago, a couple of years after this picture was taken, the clock was removed. The clock was damaged. It wasn't in good shape. They removed it, and it was missing for a long time. And I would be doing all of these tours and walking by talking about the clock, and there was no clock to talk about. Barthman's moved from its location. I believe Barthman's has an outpost now on Broad Street, but you could still see the ghost of the Barthman sign. It has been covered over by a New York souvenir shop, which has been placed there. And this is around the corner of the Barthman building. Remember, Barthman owned the whole building. You can see the name at the top. But they reinstalled the clock. On a day I was doing a tour, multiple tours, with the clock featured on it. So the first tour, no clock. Second tour, clock's back in. Literally an hour in between. And I started freaking out with the tour group. It was a private corporate tour. And somebody from New York One comes bounding around the corner and says, wait, do you know about this clock? I said, do I know about this clock? So I do an interview about the clock. I come back after the tour to get pictures for Untapped to do a story about it. Clock's gone. Apparently it didn't fit right. They fixed it a couple months later. It's back, but it's in really sad shape. This was taken in August. So when you see Fran in Pretend It's a City with the Barthman clock, that's not what the clock looks like. They digitally stitched over our photo over what the clock actually looks like because you couldn't see it. And we are thanked in the credits we are contributors to Pretend It's a City, mainly because of this photo. And that's Fran's foot there, by the way. I love that. Next to last, the oldest living thing in New York City is the Alley Pond Giant. I love trees. I love New York City trees. Yesterday, Alan Cohen talked about the dinosaur elm. There are so many great New York City trees. We are doing a talk with Allison Meyer, who just did a gorgeous map of New York City trees. Nicole will remind me of when that is, but it's going to be a great talk. We can't wait. And the alley pond giant is considered to be the oldest living organism, as we know, in New York, and it's out in Queens. And if you go down this path, and it's a really gorgeous park, by the way, you get out there and you just don't think you're in the city at all. And you sort of meander into this dense, foresty copse of trees. And right in the center, you see this very, very large Dutch tulip tree. I believe it's a tulip tree. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. Which is 450 years old, and it's 134 feet high. And this is like one of the top of the branches of it. It's hard to get a full picture of the entire tree, but there it is, all the way in the fore, sort of rising above all the other trees. And the only way you know it's the tree is because the Parks Department has put a sign under it. And this is a tree that has seen, again, the Revolution. It has seen almost the Dutch founding of New York. It has been a live witness to New York history from where it is in Queens. And there is probably one of the best full pictures that you can get of the alley pond giant. I believe this is a quote from the Parks Department. It was, quote, "It was standing tall when General George Washington passed close by in 1790 on a tour of Long Island, and it was most likely a young tree when the Dutch East India Company sent a group of Walloon families to Manhattan in 1624. And I misspoke. It's not a Dutch tulip tree. It's a tulip tree. And there's a close-up shot of the bark of the tree. And I just, I love trees. I love tree history. And in New York, where tree history is at a premium, this one has survived because it's so out of the way of urban development. It's one of the only reasons why it's had such an uninterrupted life. And there is the plaque or little sign that the Parks Department puts there. This is a little add-on. I was going through the list of secrets from the article, and I didn't know this. A lot of these I know already, or I've contributed to, or part of tours that I lead. And I read this. The geographical center of New York is Columbus Circle. And I went, huh? That doesn't make sense. So I dug a little bit further into it. And so apparently it's been said by certain New York officials and the Time Warner Center, which obviously benefits from this, that when you measure a distance from New York to, say, London, shout out to Joe, or Wales, shout out to Gareth, you're actually doing so from Columbus Circle, making it what many people say is the geographical center of New York. But I'm like, poppycock, that it can't be the geographical center of New York. The 5 boroughs of New York, and this is New York City, not the state, by the way, just doesn't make sense. So here are some, great historical photos of Columbus Circle. Of course, we know Columbus Circle has evolved over the years, and the Time Warner Center is there now, and this is what it looks like. And I thought, this is very interesting. I'm going to dig a little deeper into this. But what was even more funny is there's a spot out in Queens, off of Queens Boulevard, that decided the city did not bless this. It was just Elmhurst who had decided that they were going to put this monument right here in the middle of Queens Boulevard, that indeed this is the geographical center of New York City. But if you talk to cartographers or people who actually know a lot about these things, people think actually the geographical center of New York City is actually in Bushwick, on the site of, it's not Woodhull Hospital because that's not Bushwick, but it's a hospital out in Bushwick, which is most likely the true candidate of the geographical center of New York. It is most likely that news organizations and other Manhattan-based organizations use, again, Columbus Circle as sort of a marker to measure New York, much like they do weather measurements in Central Park. But it is technically not the geographical center of New York, and Elmhurst probably isn't either. And bonus, like if we're treating this like a concert, this is an encore. where where we play the hits. This is a bonus secret. The first and most beautiful subway station has been abandoned since 1945. I am going to throw on a new story, though, for people who have joined me for multiple stories about this station. So for those of you who know, and for those of you who don't, City Hall Station was built on a turnaround loop. It's considered to be the first ceremonial subway station built in 1904 by the Interborough Rapid Transit Company. Now, the original 28 stations were all designed by Beaux-Arts architects Hines and Lafarge, who also designed St. John the Divine. But when they got to City Hall, because it's built on that curve, it's very small. They needed 14 support arches because it's basically a tunnel. And to do that, they called in the father-son architect team, or engineering team, more appropriately, the Guastavinos. And this is a photo of Rafael Guastavino Jr. looking on as they're building the 14 support arches of City Hall Station. Now, the Guastavinos hated their photos being taken because this was patented fireproofing technology that they were doing here by layering that terracotta tile layer after layer after layer. And of course, they would fill these spaces with beautiful vaulted ceilings. And here is a photo of the completed City Hall Station. Now, one of the things you'll notice in this postcard from 1905 is that the original IRT trains had doors only on the extreme left and right sides, and they came in because it's built on a turn. The trains came in on their sides, which if you go to Union Square, you'll see is now compensated by a telescoping platform. They didn't have those then. Because this was only an uptown station, it didn't go downtown. They decided in 1945, because of lack of ridership, they were going to close it down for good. Another great postcard. Beautiful, beautiful shot of the mezzanine. This ticket counter is no longer there. It was removed in the 40s, and now this is just open space. Unfortunately, recently has been tagged by graffiti. And this was a sign that was given to us the night before, basically midnight, December 31st, 1945. They were closing Brooklyn Bridge for good. You could go to the local and express station, which we know as Brooklyn Bridge City Hall today, 600 feet away. And this is what it looks like. Actually, it's in a little bit of rougher shape than even this picture is. A lot of those, the glass from those portals is falling out, unfortunately. The Transit Museum does bring people into the station on the platform to explore. Pre-COVID, I'm sure they'll do it again post-COVID. You have to be a member. Our underground subway tour goes through on the 6th. And that actually leads me to my story that I'm going to tell, which I've never told. A lot of you who know the City Hall from other presentations I've done know that Aaron Assis and I, Aaron Assis, who did the co-led the abandoned subway talk with me, we did an installation, temporary installation for the Transit Museum a couple of years ago about City Hall Station. We called it 14 City Hall, where I wrote a sonnet about City Hall. Aaron did a string sculpture, and we put it right in the stairway leading up to the City Hall exhibit at the Transit Museum in downtown Brooklyn. Now, I don't think I've ever read the poem out loud, which I'm going to today, and I never told the story of why I wrote the poem, which I'm going to tell you today. So it's a sonnet, and it's a sonnet because you have 14 support arches of City Hall, and you have 14 lines in a sonnet. And we were contacted a couple of years ago by a gentleman who was going to propose to his wife on our subway tour. And he wanted to propose to his wife as we were passing through City Hall. Now, of course, it's really quick. So I was getting really nervous about the logistics of all of this. We were communicating back and forth, and then it turned out I realized I couldn't even be there that day. I was giving a pen tour that day, which I lead, but we have a bunch of people who lead City Hall. So we turned it over to Gabby, and I gave Gabby all the statistics. And then I thought, wouldn't it be really sweet? There's such a romanticism about this station because of its look and it's being abandoned. So I wrote this sonnet in the shape or sort of the symbolic journey through City Hall. And it only takes a minute, but I've never read it. I just flash it up and I will read it to you now because I think it goes along very nicely with the story, and it'll be a nice way to cap this all off. But here was a rendition of what we ended up doing with it, which was we got the MTA to print it on subway signage, and we put it up the staircase leading from the platform up to City Hall, the City Hall exhibition at the Transit Museum. And this is the poem. Also, I'm not the best poet in the world, so, you know, take it for a grain of salt. This is the last stop on the Downtown 6. It will be going back the way it came. The riders leave, but we know all the tricks since we're the only ones who still remain. No one could know the treasures that we hid deep inside this long abandoned jewel, the 14 arches flown against a grid, each one a bending arc of love's strange rules. My heart's a station buried on a turn, your heart's a tunnel stretching in the dark, a union sealed when naked lights do burn, for all to see this universe we mark. Our twin souls at their edges ever mix. This is the first stop on the Uptown 6. So 14 lines, and obviously sonnets, especially Shakespearean sonnets, have a rhyme scheme to them. But I actually threw in the couplet at the end, mix and 6 goes back to 6 because the journey through City Hall is circular. And of course, love usually is an eternal unbroken loop. And that is the end of me being completely and totally cheesy. Thank you for joining me. And that is the end of our presentation today. I hope that you enjoyed it. We have 140 some odd more we could do at some point in time, and we probably will. Nicole, are you here? Let me put my, I'm sure you are. Oh, maybe not. All right, let's go to questions. Oh, there you go.
I'm here. Hello.
Hello. All right. I'll go to questions, Nicole, but any good things come through the chat?
So there weren't any questions. There were a few little fun facts and stories. I can pull them while you go to the questions.
I'm going to the question tab. Does the alley pond giant flower? I don't know. That's a good question, Joe. I have only seen it with, when did I see the alley pond giant? In July. But this is a good question. I'll look into it.
Come to the Great Trees Talk and find out.
Oh, yes. Oh, good, Nicole. The Great Trees Talk. Allison Meyer will know. When is that, Nicole?
I put it in the chat. It is, I think, the 28th. It's Wednesday, the 28th at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, great. Oh, and Lorraine just answered it. Tulip poplars do flower. I actually do not know a lot about trees, and I kill every plant that comes in front of me, unfortunately, and I love plants, so that is not my milieu. What would 42 on the clock refer to? Which clock? The Barthman? Pete? Hold on. Barthman. What would 42 on the clock refer to? Most likely, is it the address? That's a good question. I'm going to have to look into that. I should just say to Pete, I'll just look up every one of your questions because you asked such good questions. But I can answer your tolls question. What were the tolls on the Brooklyn Bridge and when were they eliminated? So you used to have to pay to walk over the bridge when it first opened, and that was a penny. They also had a 5-cent cart. It was 5 cents for the cart, because remember, this is 1883. You don't have cars yet. And then it was an additional cent for the rider and an additional cent for any cattle that you had in the cart. When were they were taken down in 1915, I believe. 1912 or 1915, they eliminated the tolls on the Brooklyn Bridge. Does the subway vent house add or detract from the value of the houses next door? Would it be noisy? Actually, I know a neighbor, and no, it does not detract from the value of the house. And no, it actually is not all that noisy, so they say. And that house has a backyard that was a part of the original construction of the home. And sometimes they use the backyard. The MTA they've contacted the MTA multiple times about the neighbors in the area leasing the backyard from the MTA. The MTA has not an official agreement with them, but they have gone in and out of the backyard before. It's kind of messy. They don't really maintain it very much, but the owners of the homes around there said that they actually would, be apt or, favorable to maintaining it if they could use it. Matthew. Oh, good. Nicole, you answered that. Will this be available later? Yes. So 2 ways, Matthew. Matthew, when I'm done, it's going to come back to you in a link through an email from Livestorm via Untapped New York. And then Matthew, I'm not sure if you're an insider, but insiders get also the access to this talk in the archives later. Is all that information from a book like the Brooklyn book? The toll information, Lorraine? So the Brooklyn Bridge information comes from a swath of sources. One of my greatest sources. Oh, you mean the Secrets of Brooklyn? Trying to think of what's in the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel restaurant, the bar, La Boudoir, comes from that book. And the Cheese Caves is also in the Secrets of Brooklyn book. I think that's it. Everything else comes from a whole bunch of stuff. I could do a reading list at some point. I probably should be more diligent about doing reading lists for you guys after these. they're just so large. But I maybe I'll just do. Ooh, this is an idea. Maybe I'll just do like a top 25 go-to books that I use often for research, and those will encompass a lot of those. But the Secret Brooklyn book is awesome. That is also written by Michelle and Augustine. Well,
link in the chat.
Oh, Nicole, you're so good. Let's see. Yes, archives. Yes, okay, I'm seeing yes to the reading list. All right, I will do that. I will take that. I am busy doing a couple of presentations for Columbia, but by next week, or at least by my next presentation, which I'm not sure when that is, I will have I'll do a top 25 reading list books, which should encompass a lot of what I use as primary sources, and most of which are easily available. A lot of them, and some of which I may even have links to PDFs. All right, we are getting a resounding yes, tulip trees do flower. They drop 4 times a year. Oh, wow. Huh. I did not know that. Oh, you guys are going to love the tree talk. Awesome. All right. Any other questions?
I didn't see any.
I could take a picture of my library too. You see, so I think one of these days, I made a joke about it a couple weeks ago that we would do an apartment tour, but I could bring you through my book collection, which is in front of me. I just have to clean my apartment a little bit. I did make my bed though. I live in a studio basement apartment, which is 85% books. So, and this refrigerator behind me. Okay, so what's upcoming? Nicole, you're putting it in the chat. So tomorrow we are going to Mars. As I mentioned yesterday, Fred Flancer is taking us on an interplanetary tour, our first, not New York related, but there's some really cool footage that Fred has put together. He's a big space nut and he loves rock. So this is a really good opportunity for him. And it's a really fun tour. There's a lot of video, which I'm going to be helping him run tomorrow, and a lot of good animated slides. Then next week, the 13th, we are looking at the abandoned resorts of the Borscht Belt with photographer Maris Scheinfeld, which was based on a very popular article we did when Marvelous Miss Maisel, sorry, came out. And then Wednesday, April 14th at 6 p.m., we are going to visit the Merchant's House Museum. A Merchant's House Museum, I always think, is one of those often overlooked Manhattan museums, because that building is very well preserved from a time where most of those buildings in that area have been destroyed. Really, really neat space. So hope you will join us then. And I thank you all very much as always. So as you know, we begin to Marisa, sorry. We start all of these things. We begin series. So I think what we'll do is there's so much to cull from. The next series of, and we are working on Abandoned Subways 2, by the way, especially since Dark Cyanide has resurfaced and says he has pictures of a lot of spaces we haven't seen yet. So Abandoned Subways with Aaron, part 2 is coming soon, and we will do a Secrets part 2 as well. So much to choose from. It feels like I have a Netflix miniseries in me. Hey, anytime. I'm no Fran, but I can try. All right, everybody. Thank you, as always, for joining me. And I hope to see you as early as tomorrow. And I will work on that reading list, I promise. Stay safe. Pete, I am going to find out what that 42 is, because now I am interested. I will get back to you at some point today. Or you probably find the answer before me. And then email it. Thank you all. Again, if you're not an insider and you're joining us, you can become an insider by going to Untapped Cities /insiders. You can try us for a month. Join us is the code to use at checkout, and you get access to this all free. 41. Oh, good point. You see, this is what happens. I say bye, and then people keep talking, and I want to talk to you. 42 is a mystical number. You're right. Yes, Lorraine, it is the secret to life. I do love esoterics as well, besides history. So that could be it. Yeah, yes, the answer is in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is one of my favorite, all-time favorite sci-fi books. All right, I'm going to say goodbye before we just keep talking all day. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you again for joining me, and stay safe as always. Oh, by the way, this chat remains live afterwards as well. Bye, guys. Thank you.